kick off going straight in with a deep question.
Yeah.
So we know performance management isn't working. Everyone's talking about how it's not working. I'd just like to get your thoughts on why it hasn't worked and why it's not fit for purpose right now.
I think if I look back to my history in performance management, then it's been a mixture of closed conversations and overly mechanical ratings. And I suppose when we look at the 21st century work proposition and we're in 2019 heading to 2020, why would something that feels like it's an industrial checkpoint with an exchange of information that's largely driven by one person and received by another actually carry any weight at all? I think if we're trying to navigate a complicated world and how well we're doing in terms of our performance and our capability in that world, why would this episodic thing of almost like a done-to process mean anything to anybody? So I think it's not working because it's completely out of kilter with what people want from their work and what work is now in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because when I read about the history of performance management and where it came from, I think it went back to the war in terms of the appraisal was a way of getting people that weren't fit for purpose in the army. So it was a way of kind of ousting people.
Right.
And then it became really popular in the 70s in the year of high inflation. So it was used as a tool to dish out high performance-related pay awards because it didn't seem right to give people 20% pay rises across the board. So we're in a completely different economy, we're in a different time, but still using a tool that was designed for something really different, for something we're expecting it to do now. It just kind of feels like the wrong tool for the job.
It does, and I think, you know, I'm an HR professional by acknowledgement and by sort of, I suppose, purposeful statement. Yeah, I think we're culpable in that because I think it's been our go-to solution when an organisation's grown, and let's say, you know, a lot of people are involved in startups more now than perhaps they ever have been, and there's a certain maturity that comes with that when people go, well, surely now we ought to have some fixed systems for recognising people and for rewarding them, and so the HR default has been, let's have some performance management. And with it has come a whole clunky set of bureaucracies and the painful experiences of trying to rate people using numerical scales or various phrases that often have misfired because people are kind of confused about, well, where did this come from and why is it being done this way? Before that, I suppose, if you're into an exchange about performance and development, you often would have that conversation quite naturally. You'd talk about the things that work well and things you wanted to improve, and you'd start to build some intent for future career. And we seem to just have put a whole load of mechanics and bureaucracy into that to create a much less human exchange and something that now people are feeling really actually quite uncomfortable about. And as you say, it's often used as a "you're trying to get rid of me, aren't you?" type conversation. It's got a fear of dread now. So I think we've done something really wrong in over-engineering it and not adapting it to modern ways of working.
Yeah, and I think what's some interesting learnings is that I think a lot of these things happen for quite benign reasons. So there was a lot of worry and concern about discrimination and about making things objective and fair. So then extra ratings started going and all were worried that people just could focus on outputs and not enough on behaviours. So we started rating behaviours as well. And then you're up with this complex thing that's so unusable that you've lost the original purpose. Is that something you've experienced?
Yeah, it feels, in an attempt, like you say, to cover all bases of a human being in a working environment with responsibilities, accountabilities and targets and performance measures, we've created a whole sense of being lost in the process. So people seem to want to just get it out of the way as quickly as possible. And I can remember a conversation in a kitchen area and in a past employer of mine with a very sort of I guess you'd say, sort of experienced technologist who was just dreading the yearly conversation. And I stopped them mid-flow and went, hey, you know, I'm in HR, what's going on here? And he just said, it means nothing to me except pain and a sort of a whole stack of things that I'd rather not have once a year. So I'm like, well, don't you get any regular feedback then? He went, well, yeah, of course we do. And so I tried to sort of defend the process, but I found myself unmoved in my own sort of estimation of performance management with just this sense of dread of this annual year big deep dive that people would walk away from exhausted, unmotivated, when it should have the opposite effect. And so I'm thinking, well, how have we let this go so wrong?
And also that sense of dread being, this is the only time I'm going to find out how I'm doing. What an awful situation that you're building up to this thing. You don't know how you're doing until the meeting.
And we've made such a big deal, and you talked about performance-related pay as a classic sort of a bolt into this process, that yearly sense of waiting to see how you've done, and then being so underwhelmed with like a £250 reward is almost like, you know, people go, well, why was that ever part of the deal?
Was
So
that
I think
effort worth
exactly,
repaying? No.
exactly. So I think we're now starting to see that there are some alternatives, and on the one hand, you get very sort of prominent articles in things like Harvard Business Review, with big consultancy firms saying we've scrapped it, we've moved away from it, we lost millions of hours of time in this process, and you think, hallelujah, we're seeing the light. But then you think, well, what are they doing instead? And you do start to sort of default into the processes and I guess you'd say sort of the rigorous side of things, when actually it should be about people having a real sense of how they're doing, where they're going, what they could be doing more of, and an exchange that means something to them and the person who has the duty of care for them, i.e. the line manager. So getting back to that is lovely, and I do like the thought that I'm seeing more people talk about check-ins, career conversations, and it feels like we're adapting it, but I don't see any big stick of dynamite blowing it up to build it again.
Yeah.